Okay, here it is, guys and gals. You don't need a motor to test the Pierce error simulations that I've come up with. Going back to my lightning oscillator, the lightning oscillator changes from the scope exhibiting unidirectional randomized DC impulses. It changes out of that into very regulated spikes because it becomes an oscillator when you give it the opportunity to discharge, to throw away all of this rampant escalation of overunity production, or synthesis if you prefer. And that's what I did with my two discharge points, firstly to earth ground, and then I learned I could do it to two aerials as well. And then I turned them into battery chargers, an earth-oriented and an aerial-oriented. But you don't need a motor, because the only purpose of the motor is to throw away energy. See, that's what thermodynamics is predicated on. It's predicated on the ripple wave of the transverse, style of behavior of wave mechanics, in which we either do conversion into something useful, or we do conversion into losses. Either way, it's a conversion, and the transverse ripple wave is good for that. But that's what a motor does. So, in order to start the car, you have to have provision for dissipation built in, because if you're just sitting there, electric motors don't turn unless you move the car, and so you can't start the car unless you have provision for waste in addition to the motor. Now, John Bedini, I recall, he would put in a little neon bulb, and you had to have the bulb there to be able to run the circuitry. I don't remember which one it was, regardless of whether or not you have a load. So that was your minimal load. Your default load was that little neon bulb. Well, in this case, here's the kicker. The so-called Tesla coils that have become so popular, their strictly only purpose is to waste energy, to throw it away. Sure, they built up a voltage charge, but all they do is throw it away. All this arcing coming off, and it's nice display, and you can set it up to music. Very nice. Well, when Tesla did the Pierce error demonstration, the other part of the circuitry that's outside the project box, and I've been alluding to this for some time now, and I see now what it is, strictly speaking. It's a Tesla coil. In other words, extending out conductively, two leads in parallel with the motor coil, or set of motor coils. He has two leads going from the project box to the AC motor, but then he should have another pair of leads coming out of the AC motor. In other words, the AC motor now is in parallel with the project box and with this waste sub-circuitry that's not part of the project box, so it's not part of the story. But I know from my own experience, if you want to invite overunity, you have to make provision to throw away all of the energy you're not going to be able to use, because you're going to get more than you could possibly imagine you could ever use for any purpose you can think of. Now, in the context of the simulator, I found out there is a limit, but we can never spend that limit as individuals. That kind of limit is spent by a whole community, a whole city. That's how much energy is being produced. So you have to throw away the excess, or else the circuitry dies because it gets clogged. It's just like clogging a river. The river can't flow if it gets clogged. If the flow of river is so much that the banks of the river are not wide enough, it just gets clogged. So a Tesla coil, you know what a Tesla coil is, right? You've got a device for building up voltage, and then you got the primary coil, which is a current-oriented coil according to analysis of the two coils of a standard electromechanical watt-hour meter. There are two coils on the armature and they're right angles to each other, and one is two turns of a very stout wire, that's the current coil, and then there's many turns, several hundred I think, a very thin wire, which is the voltage coil. And they're electrically at 90 degrees to each other. The voltage coil is connected to the watt-hour meter's input, the intake, in parallel, and the current coil is in series on one leg of the two terminals. So the primary coil of, 2 turns of copper ribbon, at the base of a standard conventional Tesla coil, that's your current coil. And then your many turns of tightly packed, very thin magnetic enameled wire on your central hub in the middle of that, that's your voltage coil, but we call it the secondary. And that's connected, one end of that coil is connected, as I recall, if I have this right, is connected to the top load, or I guess you could call it a top mast, because it's like an aerial, but it's shaped as a donut, right? Because the donut or the sphere is a very good conducive apparatus for becoming capacitive rather than something else. So, and that, though, helps the buildup of discharges, too. Well, it's because the circuitry is set up to have discharges. It's not the top mast or the top load. But I'm thinking to myself, that's merely the portion of the Pierce-Arrow demonstration that we don't know about, but is very important because it has to do with loss. It has to do with you engineer into the overall circuitry the idea that you have to be prepared to throw away energy immediately before you even start moving the car, because the motor isn't going to be able to do it. The motor is just sitting there and can't dissipate any energy because it's not rotating. It's not like an engine that you're idling while you're sitting in traffic. An electric motor stops. When you stop, it stops. And so there's no way for the motor to dissipate energy if that's a required element of the circuitry in order to develop an overunity flow. Wherever it comes from, it has to go somewhere else and pass through the circuitry of the motor circuitry, the power circuitry and the load circuitry, to get to somewhere else and get thrown away. And if the motor's not throwing it away, something else has to before you start moving the car, before you start rotating the motor shaft. So that's what I was trying to get to. But I didn't understand the functionality because I didn't have a reference to refer to compare what I was attempting to scenario in my mind. So this is it. So the chassis of the car is part of the circuit, and that's what I figured, and it's connected directly to the aerial on the back hood, the rear hood of the car, as I suspected. But the connection of the car to the motor load was the part that I was fuzzy on. Now I'm no longer fuzzy. So you have another coil in parallel with the motor load. That's your primary coil, and that is wrapped around the secondary coil. That's your voltage coil that's connected to, or at least one end, I don't know if both ends, but at that point, since it's a voltage coil, you can't do both ends, because then it would be a current dissipating coil. So one end of the voltage coil is connected to the chassis directly, strongly coupled, directly coupled, and then the chassis is connected to the aerial. So the idea is you take the current excess that the motor can't handle because it doesn't need the excess current that the project box is producing, and dissipates that current through a current coil, a primary current coil of just a few turns of stout wire that's surrounding a voltage-oriented coil, a very thin wire of many turns, but only one end of that voltage coil is connected directly to the chassis to impart a voltage to the chassis, but the chassis is iron. And what should happen is that it should become magnetically charged. Because we're trying to siphon off excess current, and that means not voltage, but amps, and not electrostatics, but magnetism. According to Donald Smith, magnetism is amperage. So we're trying to take off amperage, and that means we need a magnetizable body, and that's the 4,000 pound plus chassis of the iron chassis of the Pierce-Arrow car. But how do we do that? What are the connections? Well, the model, the metaphor, the archetype The archetype is a conventional Tesla coil, and the function of a Tesla coil is to dissipate energy. It's showy and it's exhibitionist, but that's all it does, is to throw away energy, waste it, perform no useful work. Because you have to get rid of the excess you're not using as your workload for your AC motor as fast as possible. And the AC motor can't do that because it's a regulated device. It can only get rid of so much energy so quickly and no more. Otherwise, what do you want? You want it to overheat? You want it to arc and fry and melt the insulation on the coils? Of course not. So it's a regulated dissipation device, but free energy is a wild stallion. It doesn't behave according to rules. So it's going to throw at you more energy than you can possibly imagine how to get rid of fast enough. And hey, Richard Hackenberger went through that problem, but they took a different route on how to get rid of the excess energy. First, they blew up batteries, to replace earth ground, because, how are you going to do earth ground in a moving vehicle? And then they went to batteries, blowing them up, and then they went to ionization, and that worked for them. Well, this is partly an ionization situation, because the more quickly you drive your car, the more energy it will create. And the slower you run it, the less overunity it will create, more or less, in a ballpark sort of way. So when you're sitting at a stoplight, you're still creating an excess of energy that you have to get rid of, but it's not as much as when you're cruising at 90 miles an hour. So when you pick up speed, the antenna is going through the air that much faster, and it'll be able to ionize to a greater degree, similar to the compressed air that Richard Hackenberger blew through the chassis of the EV Green motor once it was configured correctly as two floating plates, two sets of plates, to set up a voltage charge. Well, here Tesla's just got one plate, and that's the aerial, and the other plate is its environment. The aerial surrounding environment is the floating plate. The other it's the extension. So the air is acting both as the dielectric and as the extended floating plate. It's a little bit of both. But that's not the main purpose. The main purpose is to magnetize the chassis and store it there as a magnetic charge, but not as an electrostatic charge. So the chassis cannot be directly coupled, strongly coupled, to the circuitry, starting with the motor and then proceeding forward from that, or backwards I should say, to the project box. Because that would set up an electrostatic charge and make the chassis a high voltage danger risk for the passengers in the car to get electrocuted, because the car would want to arc to them. So it can't be directly coupled, but it can be inductively coupled. And of course it's perfect for that purpose, because now we've got an extended iron core of the secondary coil proceeding into the remainder of the chassis of the car, and as some of us know, you cannot create a barrier for magnetic fields. All you can do is reshape it. I learned this on lessemf.com. So when they sell magnetic barriers, they tell you, they warn you, this ain't going to stop it. It's not going to absorb it. It's going to reshape it. And so depending on where your edges are, that's where your new field is going to come out of. Your plate, your magnetizable plate. So let's say it's mu metal, or iron metal, iron sheet, whatever, iron cage. You're just going to reshape the magnetism. Electrostatics is different. You can ground that, but a magnetic field, you can't ground it. Well, you can if you do a double grounding. That's right. On the sheath of a coax, you do a double grounding. But in a car, you're not going to be able to do that. And so I think what he did was he turned the chassis into an extended and magnetizable core of a coil, which is the secondary coil that's picking up from the primary coil, and it's the primary that's directly connected to the circuitry of the motor, load, and the project box, but it stops right there at that primary coil. And then the secondary coil picks it up by way of induction and transfers it to the chassis of the car, but as an opens path. So everything after the primary coil becomes an open path, but everything up to the primary coil used for dissipation of excess energy is a closed path. You know, the primary coil of the dissipation subcircuit, which is the same as the primary coil of a Tesla coil, standard, conventional, not the type that Tesla used, but the kind that everybody else uses these days. And the motor coil and the project box, those are all closed loops. Those are all closed paths. But the pickup coil, to get induced from the primary dissipating coil, is an open path, is the beginning of an open path that extends through the magnetizable iron core, the magnetizable iron material of the chassis of the Pierce Arrow, and then it terminates on the aerial that's connected directly to the chassis on the rear hood of the car. So you have to be prepared before you turn on the project box circuitry to dissipate excess energy to invite overunity into the circuit of the project box, or else it's not going to come. It's not going to want to come because, well, where am I supposed to dissipate to? Where am I supposed to get wasted to? I don't see you set up for me to get thrown away. So why should I come if you're not going to throw me away? You know, I don't care what you use a little small portion of me for your little devices, but you better provide for throwing me away in excess at a rapid pace. And part of the problem is, well, you can't throw it away readily at the pace that it wants to be thrown away at, so you have to have a sink. So what kind of sink? Well, it's not going to be electrostatic, because that's a hazard to the occupants of the car. So it has to be magnetic. And that makes sense, because I've been kind of thinking that all along, but I was thinking all kinds of other crazy notions, you know, how Tesla did it. Well, this is how he did it, because I didn't have a metaphor. I didn't have an archetype. Excuse me. I did not have an archetype to guide my little feet in the right direction. And so when we look at Tesla coils of today, you know, you can buy them. MIT sells a tiny little Tesla coil, you know, a desktop version. You can get it on an affiliated MIT site that's sanctioned, you know, some of the students there, as their project, they build these little Tesla coils, and you can buy them. You know, they're prefabricated, they come as a kit, you assemble the parts, and you got yourself, I don't know, a 4-inch high Tesla coil or something. It's a tiny little thing, but it's scaled down. Everything is scaled down proportionally correctly. Not what Dr. Green on Energetic Forum sells. That's different. That's something else. That's a Tesla magnifying transmitter, which is a true Tesla setup for a Tesla coil. It looks similar in some respects, but it's different. But the Tesla coil I'm referring to is the ones that everybody is familiar with, and they think that's what a Tesla coil is. But it's purely for the purpose of throwing away energy. It has no other purpose whatsoever, and it's simply the portion of the Pierce Arrow demonstration that was not part of the story. And so we have to provide that, because I know from experience, my simulations have taught me, you have to throw away the energy to invite overunity into the circuit. Okay. What else? Did I leave something else out? Because in my simulations, that's all the transformer in the center of the two tracks, the two horizontal tracks, represents. And that's what the simulator does so well. There are a couple of things it does that does not happen in real life. And that's why the simulation won't work in real life, strictly speaking, on its own. Because the simulator does too much to make it too easy for me to make an overunity circuit by comparison to the real world. And that is, it can throw away energy. I see it happen all the time. The energy appears in one part of the circuit and disappears in another. How does it do that? Why? Because it overreacts. You know, it is a new thing I'm learning now about reactance. And it's no mistake. It's no coincidence that we call it reactance, because it's the energy that it's intended to be thrown away. That's what overunity is. By definition, it's the energy you want to throw away if you want to keep getting more of it. And it's the reaction to whatever it is you're doing. And if you do things right, it's not merely a question of production. Everybody thinks, oh, I want to produce overunity. Well, that's only half of it. You have to be prepared to throw it away as fast as you produce it, or else you're not going to be able to produce it. And that's actually a spiritual maxim. If you want more, you have to give more. You have to get rid of, or else you're not going to get more. It's a spiritual maxim. So you can't hoard and expect to get more. It'll be terminated. You won't get any more. You have to be willing to share it, to give it away, and not hold on to it, not hoard it. So that's what I was doing with the transformer in this, or the pair of transformers, as the case may be, in the center of the two horizontal tracks. I was simply dissipating energy. Whether or not it's a good model of a AC motor is irrespective of anything. Its sole purpose was to get rid of energy, and that's what it does. The energy comes down as an open path. The aerial is one on one side of each horizontal track, and on the opposite side, on the inner side, is the single open path that goes to one node of the four terminals of a transformer. The two pairs of coils on a transformer are shorted out, in a sense, by having low-level capacitors stretched across them. So they're longitudinally shorted, if you prefer. It would help to say it that way so you don't get the wrong idea. But that's it. And the energy just goes around in circles. Where did it go? It went into the magnetizable core of the transformer, and that is the equivalent model or metaphor or archetype of the magnetizable chassis of the Pierce Arrow car. That's where my headspace is running now. So I never included an AC motor because I never bothered to go to the trouble to model one. I know it's complicated. So that's what I've done. I've been using, unless the transformer is producing energy, it's a sink for energy in Paul Falstad's electronic simulator. That is the beauty of the magic. It's not just the capacitors. That's one side of the magic of his electronic simulator. The other side of the magic is that you have to have a transformer to complement the magic that his capacitors are producing. You can't use the air core coils for any magical purpose. You can use them for certain inductive purposes, but not magical inductive purposes, because either the transformer is producing overunity or it's soaking it up and making it disappear. Isn't that what Eric Dollard said? The magic of his synthesis of electricity is only one side of the possibility. The other side is getting rid of it. And who would think you have to engineer that into your circuit, or else you're not going to produce it, overunity? You have to get rid of it. And the same mechanism that inductively produces it is the same mechanism that inductively gets rid of it. And you know what? All these people who are doing LMD, and I swear, there are respectable people doing respectable experiments, because I corresponded with one in Australia several years ago, and he put up on YouTube, and he's, everybody cites him and refers to him, but he uses air core coils in his LMD daisy chain. They do not have magnetizable cores, and yet he creates overunity. But what I'm looking at in my simulation is that it never worked for me in the world of in the world of Paul Falstad's simulator to use air core coils, the single inductors. I had to use transformer cores. I didn't have to use both coils. I could use just one and discard and ignore the other one and leave the two ends free. But I had to use a transformer because I needed that model that he engineered into that of the magnetizable core, the iron core, not an air core, in order to produce overunity. Now I'm realizing it works both ways. The iron core can also be a sink hole to absorb inductive energy, magnetic energy, and make it disappear. Isn't that cool? But see, now, the whole point, when I say my simulations cannot be built as is, they have to be interpreted. Well, what's the interpretation? Well, it's taking me a while to come up with the interpretation, because what bench experience do I have? Very little. But one of my specialties is iron. Most of my experiments have been bionic circuits, but I have done a magnetic field experiment using various magnetized or magnetizable objects, because I have this obsession with iron and magnetic fields, because I'm born weak. And when you're born weak, congenitally defectively weak, it's not just your immune system that's weak, your digestive system that's weak, your stamina, your adrenal glands, your pancreas, your spleen, whatever. It's your magnetic field. And that's why when I did biocircuits, Leon Ernest Demon, I never used copper wires, except the very first time I did a biocircuit. I realized right away copper hurts. It actually creates pain for me and doesn't help me. And then I realized, well, what other choice do I have? The only other choice I have is iron wire. So I went to the hardware store, I got iron wire, and the next time I did a biocircuit with iron wire connecting the various points on my body, it was bliss. I was in heaven. I was a bliss ninny. And from that point on, I never used copper wire ever again. I always used iron wire in the biocircuit. It worked for me. It did what I needed. And I don't do well taking copper supplements. But I got on my table over here iron supplement. I don't take it every day. I take it when I think I need it, because I know I do need iron, but I don't need copper. And when you read up on this stuff, you find out some people don't need copper. They're copper sensitive. They need iron, and they need to avoid copper. So that's why I've focused my attention span on the iron of the three elements of Tesla's trimetal generator, because I wanted to understand iron. If I understood anything, I want to understand iron. You know, aluminum is still a mystery to me. Copper, well, you know, it's conventional. Copper carries current, you know, and you can make coils out of it. But aluminum is still a mystery, but iron isn't, because I tried to get familiar with iron. And so my earthing boosting device for boosting my earthing experience when I sleep at night, and I'm connected now because of the smart meter that got put back on the building, so I try to stay grounded now 24/7. But on the side of my boosting device, opposite earth ground, so that I can get the benefit of the device. And the device is predicated on an iron pipe with a copper winding around it, so it's true, you know, and I got copper wire leading from me, you know, going to earth ground. But I have a boosting device that's predicated on iron, because the center of the pipe is filled with magnetite sand I bought on eBay, special magnetite sand that comes from Nevada, and it's surrounded by quartz sand, and you know, but there's a lot of iron in there, beyond the fact that I found out I need to use silica, and silica, you know, quartz silica is not part of Tesla's trimetal generator. It's just aluminum, iron, and copper, we're told. But I realized I needed silica. You know, like when I did my capacitor plates for my biocircuitry, besides the iron wire, I needed to use glass plates as my dielectric for my capacitors when I did my daisy chain LMD3 daisy chain modules to boost my biocircuitry experience. I used iron wire for the coils. I used pencils for my cores because I didn't know what to use. I didn't have anything available, so the coils were like wimpy. They had no influence whatsoever, but the capacitors, I was singing. And that's all I really cared about anyway, because I had iron wire throughout the circuitry, so all I really needed was to boost the dielectric portion of the circuitry, and that's what I did, and I did it very well, and I got bliss, beautiful boosted bliss out of the biocircuitry experience. But in this earthing boosting circuit that I use, it's this thing down here, this big sewer pipe that's filled with, that's lined with aluminum foil and then filled with quartz sand, and then in the middle of that is an iron pipe that has an 18 gauge double winding. It's counter-wound with a center tap, and I only use one of those two coils that are reverse wound. And it's interesting because Donald Smith talked about that, and I didn't know. I don't know. Maybe I got it from him. I just subconsciously remembered. But I felt my way through the development of that circuit. And so I only use one of those two paths because I do a center tap. That's one node. And then the other one end of those two coils is the other node that I use to pass through. But then I attach a 4-inch, 1-inch square, 4-inch long neodymium magnet to the outside of that coil to give the whole thing a boost, to saturate the iron pipe. And then I have magnetite sand on the inside of the pipe, and I have a quartz crystal on the inside of that, a double-pointed from Brazil. I don't know if that will do anything, but I just thought, oh, it's a good thing. Throw it in. What the hell? And that's it. But it's an open path circuit. It's entirely an open path circuit, but I have a capacitor set up. The aluminum foil is a floating plate, and the coil of wire, or the iron core, or both. Actually, the iron core is the other floating plate. That's right. The iron core is the other floating plate. And everything else in between is what's in between. And it works. It works like a charm. It boosts my earthing experience. Now, there are other things, that I didn't get into that have to do with where you are. Are you on the equator? Are you on the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere? That has to do with the orientation of the thing, how you position it, and which of the two halves of the two counterwound coils do you use? Do you use the counterclockwise one, or do you use the counterclockwise one, or do you use the clockwise wound coil? Those are little other extras that I intuitively, discovered. I have no way of testing it because I can't fly down to the South Pole or the Southern Hemisphere or the equator to find out if it's right or not. And I was very sensitive when I was up in Packwood, Washington. And I had my attention on it, so I wouldn't want to try to revisit it now. I was really into it at the time because I wanted to fashion it and engineer it, so I engineered it based on my intuition and based on my body feedback. But it works like a charm. Anyway, so I really got into iron, to understand iron. And I understand aluminum. It's a boost. It's a caffeine boost. To me, that's the way I look at it. Aluminum is a caffeine boost, and you have to know how to use it, or else you can overcharge the system with a caffeine boost, the circuitry, whatever circuitry you're using. But that's why I brought in the quartz sand to serve as a sink hole for the dielectric energy that's in between, that's building up in between that aluminum foil lined inner lining of the sewer pipe project box chassis, and the other floating plate being the iron pipe and the magnetite sand inside of that, and the quartz crystal inside of that, now that I think of it. So I got several things going on here. Anyway, it might be 1.5 capacitors that are there. Yeah, true. I never thought of that. Well, if you include the sewer pipe, that's already 1.5. It's 2, but 2 halves on the other side of the 1. Whatever. The PVC sewer pipe. Let's see. What else? I think that's it. That was my little aha right now moment. So I think that helps, because we have to know that it's not all about production. Remember, 4-quadrant theory of electricity, according to Eric Dollard, 2 of those factors, one is production and one is dissolution or decomposition, and they're both equally important, and they both have to be included. You don't just do whichever, I'll pick this one, but I'll ignore that one. Don't work that way. A lightning oscillator has to both get rid of energy as well as produce energy. And it uses the earth to discharge to get rid of all of the buildup. But only after another sub-circuit section of the lightning oscillator circuit builds it up. And another sub-circuit produces what was built up. So that central section that builds it up is the air core coils and their associated resistors. And that would be equivalent to the chassis of the car and the secondary coil that is connected to by way of open path. And of course the discharge earth ground would be the aerial on the rear hood. So I've already done these things. I just have to understand where they fit in. And so that's why a lot of my simulations, they're just pieces of the puzzle. They're not the entire answer. each of my simulations are just pieces of the entire picture of a perspective, and now I have to integrate them, you know? I did all these circuits, but it doesn't mean I understand what I did and what their significance is. I have to now grow into an appreciation of what role each unique simulated circuit plays in the overall picture of Eric's vision of our electrical universe. It's his vision, and he tries to describe it to us, and in a sense the simulator has done that for me, but it's in pieces of a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle, and I have to figure out which pieces go where under appropriate circumstances, you know? You just don't throw everything but the I did that when I created each simulation. I threw everything but the kitchen sink to see what would work, but now that I have simulations that work, I have to understand that they're just pieces of the puzzle, and I have to come to a growth of understanding as to where they fit into the entire overall perspective. And you have to have a broad perspective like Eric Dollar to know where any of my simulations, what are they good for, you know? They're not good for standing on their own merit. They're good for whatever function, whatever role they play that they are uniquely capable of fulfilling. That's what they are. They each have very unique personalities. That's what I love about them. They're so unique. They're so different. Even though they're all predicated on Eric Dollar's LMD module, just about almost all of them, yet they all have unique characters, each of their own. It's like they're all a room full of cats, you know? But if you have pets, you know, and if you have more than one, you realize they're all different. They all have their own personality. And if you have a history of taking in domesticated animals, you realize they all have their unique personalities. They're unique persons. They're unique individuals. They're not clones of each other. They're cats or they're dogs, maybe. But they all develop their own personality, and they're quite human. They become very humanized, as Charlie Lutz would say. When we domesticate the animal species, they all start to become humanized when they start to associate with us. And they all start to develop very unique human characteristics, which imparts to them a very unique human personalities. Neuroses, everything, you know? All the things we see in ourselves, we start to see it in our pets. Anyway, so that's what are in each of these circuits. They're all unique personalities because they're unique emphasis on the entire broad perspective that Eric Dollar possesses. They're just a unique focus is what they are. So what it means is the skillfulness of being able to create any kind of circuit that fulfills the purpose you intend to create, obviously. It's not a science at that point, it's a skill. Of course, I never approached this as a science, because I'm not about to. I wouldn't dream of it. But I go at it as if it's a skill to be built. Like an artist, you know. You don't know what you're doing, it just feels right. But if you do it enough, in hindsight, you can analyze it up your gazoo and discover all kinds of layers of meaning that are true, and not just made-up fictions that sound pretty because they look kind of similar, you know. No, you actually understand your artwork as a function. And that's what artists do. Once they get good enough at it, they see art as a function. One of the roles it plays is a function. And it depends what the art is and what the piece is, what the artwork is, what it's intended to do. And that's what Charlie Lutz told us about Richard Wagner. He knew enough to engineer functionality into his art. Very highly stylized functionality at that. And he's not the only one. Bartok, somebody, I forget his name, discovered the use of the golden ratio in so much aspects of Bartok's music, and Bartok never shared it with anybody. He took it to his grave. And this guy figured it out. The tempo, the rhythm, the rhythmic structure, the melodic structure, everything. The golden ratio is used, and the Fibonacci series is used extensively throughout Bartok. And I was speaking to my roommate here about that, and she said, you know, it could have been just, he may not have even known what he was doing. It may just be an expression of his consciousness that just spontaneously came out in the form of his music compositions. So we'll never know because we can't ask him, right? He's dead, so unless you want to do seances, but I don't want to go there. Not me. No thank you. So we leave the dead alone. We send them our good thoughts, but we leave them alone. We don't bug them. How did you do, leave them alone, because they don't want to be bugged where they're at. They're happy as a camper, and they don't want to be reminded of what it was like to be human. Because Charlie Lewis has a story about that. He had a story about everything. Imagine two people in heaven having a conversation. Do you remember earthly life? No. Good. Because they don't want to remember. They might have some vague feeling. Maybe we were humans. Can't be possible. Who would want to be a human? My God, when we're here, everything's beautiful. Why would you want to go to Earth? Well, eventually the soul will decide to do it. It's got karmic lessons to work out. But the former minds, since deceased, when they go to heaven, that's the last thing they want to do is go back to Earth. Are you kidding? Unless you're a meditator. Then you want to go back as quickly as possible, and the minimum wait time is 30 days you have to spend in heaven before you can be allowed to go back. Because you want to grow as fast as you can. You can grow in heaven in certain ways, but not karmically. You can learn anything you like. You can sit with any master. You can sit with Christ, But it's not the same because you're not working out your karma. You're just learning, but you're not working out your karma. So you can take all the gifts you learned in heaven into Earth, but Earth is where you get tested, whether or not that learning can get set into the concrete of your minds, so it's fully set there and cannot be shaken free no matter what happens to you. That's the test, is whether or not the knowledge can be shook out of you, shook loose, or whether it's really set. You really own it. You are it. It is you and you are it. That's what the test of our life on earth is are you an embodiment of all those gifts you received in heaven? And not quite ready yet? Okay, you got to cook some more in the earthly plane before you're ready to take it all with you and not need to go to heaven anymore to get any more of those gifts, because you got all the essential gifts glued into you. You're it. You're that. And that you are. And there's no separation between that and you, even upon separation of the body. That means you're fully capable, functional. You're a fully functional human being. That's the only point of having a human nervous system. It's a temporary, functional, it's a temporary, potentially fully functional nervous system. And we get more gifts in heaven that we take with us and we bring with us when we come back to Earth to work, to stitch into our physicality, our brain, our body, our feelings, everything, to stitch it in, sometimes painfully, more often than not. But to get it stitched in there so it won't come back out, and you can't force it to be pushed in, and you can't hold on to it to get it glued. All you can do is alternate. All you can do is bring it in, and then you get tested and see what gets shook loose. And then you bring it back in, and you see what gets shook loose. And every time you bring it back in, a little more stays stuck, and a little less gets shook free, until nothing gets shook out of you, and it's there. It just stays there. And you don't have to put your attention. It's just all spontaneous. It's automatic. It's that deep-seated area of the brain that takes care of it. It's just automatic, but you have to build it up in layer upon layer, and then it just takes care of it. Each layer, it gets part of its automated processes, and it's there all the time, and it becomes part of the consciousness, and it doesn't leave you because it's adequate as a fully functional nervous system, and so you don't need to get another one in some future life. You've already got it. You've got it totally. And it's the funniest thing is, you're the last person to know that you've got it. If you think you've got it, you don't. Because it's impossible to know directly, because it's too natural to really be self-evident. Maybe everybody else notices, but you're the ignoramus who doesn't know you've got it. But if you think you got it and nobody else knows, then you don't got it. It's like the opposite. It's totally weird. It's totally weird. But that's the only way to be tested. To be the last person on earth to know that you're being tested. How many times have I gone through a test and failed, and only in hindsight realized, oh, I was being tested. No wonder I feel rotten, because I flunked. But at the time, I felt really good and juiced up, and like now, juiced up and sassy, just full of it, full of myself, because I'm getting charged up, because I'm giving it all away. I'm discharging it. See, that's where the secret to overunity is. I'm busy getting rid of it. Oh, I have a captured audience. My sports camera that makes my nose look big. Not that my nose isn't big, but it's a fisheye lens on my sports camera, so it makes my nose look big. Anywho, or my nostrils, or my nose hairs. Take it as you wish, or don't wish. Okay, now I'm being a fool. I don't have anything intelligent to say. So it's time to sign off.